Today, we are talking about one of the most recognizable rifles of the modern era, the Mk14 Mod 0 Enhanced Battle Rifle. Now, this isn't just a piece of hardware, it's a rifle with a seriously fascinating and complicated story. A story about taking something old and trying to make it new again, with a whole lot of style. Okay, let's just be real for a second. For so many of us, our first introduction to this rifle was probably crawling through the mud in a ghillie suit on a certain video game mission. And you just immediately thought, that is the coolest gun I have ever seen, right? That image is just, it's burned into the brain of a whole generation of gamers. But you know, what happens when you put the controller down? What's the story when it's not pixels and polygons, but actual real-world combat? Well, the true story of the Mk14 is all about military necessity, some absolutely brilliant engineering, and yeah, some pretty major trade-offs. Let's dig in. To really understand the EBR, you first gotta understand the rifle it's actually built on. And believe me, this is where the story takes its first really unexpected twist. That's right, this super modern, almost futuristic looking weapon, it's all built around the guts of an M14, a rifle that had one of the shortest tenures ever as the main US service rifle. It got replaced pretty quickly, but it just refused to go away. You know, one of the best analogies I've ever heard for the M14 is this one. It's kind of like the M1 Garand's son who, well, he didn't do so great in school, maybe partied a little too hard, but then he sort of got his act together and ended up being undeniably cool. Now, what's so fascinating is that the EBR wasn't just born from a single idea. It actually had two separate origin stories running at the same time. On one side, you had the Navy SEALs, who wanted a shorter, more compact M14 for kicking indoors, and that gave us the Mk14 Mod 0. But on the other side, the Army had a totally different problem in places like Afghanistan. Their guys were getting outranged, and they needed something called Overmatch. So what in the world is Overmatch? Well, honestly, this airsoft analogy is perfect. Imagine you show up to a game, everyone's got a basic spring pistol, but one kid rolls up with a top-of-the-line, full-metal electric gun. That's Overmatch. The Army realized their M4s just weren't cutting it at longer distances, and then someone had a light bulb moment and remembered the thousands upon thousands of old M14s they just had sitting in storage. And that light bulb moment, it led to one of the most dramatic firearm makeovers you'll ever see. I mean, how do you take a classic 1950s battle rifle with a wood stock and turn it into this futuristic-looking machine? It sounds really complicated, but the process was surprisingly direct. Basically, you take a standard M14 action, you pull it out of its old-school wooden stock, and you just drop it right into this new all-aluminum chassis made by a company called Sage International. The result? A complete transformation. Suddenly, you've got a pistol grip, a telescoping stock, and rails everywhere for all your modern accessories. Now, this is where the real magic is. The Sage chassis wasn't just about looking cool. It was an incredible piece of engineering. The whole point was to create a much more rigid, stable platform for the rifle's action, which, in theory, should make it way more accurate. And this was a huge deal, because it meant you could skip all the super complex, time-consuming gunsmithing that it usually took to make an M14 shoot straight. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? All that solid aluminum and all those cool new features, they come at a price. And that price is weight. A fully loaded EBR, with an optic and a magazine, can tip the scales at around 17 pounds. Now, to put that into perspective for you, a modern M4 is like half that. This thing is a heavy, heavy boy. So we know it looks amazing and it's been modernized, but how did it actually perform when it got out into the field? Well, this is where the story gets really, really complicated. The EBR is a rifle of pretty extreme trade-offs. On the plus side, and this was really surprising to me, all that weight actually makes it a pretty gentle shooting rifle, especially for a powerful .308. The recoil is really manageable. But the big downside is, well, first, the weight again, and second, and maybe more importantly, it earned a reputation for being unbelievably finicky. This quote just says it all. It perfectly captures the rifle's biggest headache. Its accuracy was just so fragile. You could literally turn the wrong screw a little too much, and, as the quote says, you'd go from a 1 MOA gun, which is, very accurate, to a 4 MOA gun, which is not. Your precision rifle is suddenly not precise at all. So why? Why was it so temperamental? Well, it really all comes back to that original M14 action. It was just notoriously difficult to make accurate in the first place. The new chassis, with all its benefits, also added a ton of new screws and contact points, more variables that could throw things off. I mean, just taking the rifle apart for a basic cleaning could completely ruin its zero. At the end of the day, you gotta remember, this was a patch, a stopgap solution, not a ground-up precision rifle. And that really hammers home a key point about military gear, doesn't it? Trying to adapt old tech for a modern war is just a minefield of compromises. So, what's the final verdict on this incredibly cool but seriously complicated rifle? I think the general consensus perfectly sums up the rifle's whole identity crisis. It is, without a doubt, one of the coolest looking guns ever made, period. But that incredible coolness doesn't always mean it's the most practical tool for the job. So what is the EBR's real legacy? I think this chart puts it into perspective perfectly. Yeah, okay, it was a tactical stopgap. And sure, it was a bit of an impractical beast. But look at that biggest slice of the pie right there. Pop culture icon. That, right there, is where the EBR truly made its mark. And, this might just be the most important takeaway of all. For all of its real-world flaws, the sheer vibe of the EBR, that undeniable cool factor, it got a ton of new people interested in firearms. It acted as a gateway. It proved that sometimes in our very visual world, just looking the part is a function all on its own. So where does that leave us with the Mk14 EBR? Is it an iconic failure? A classic case of style over substance? Or was it a necessary stopgap? The imperfect solution that was just good enough right when it was needed the most? Just like the rifle itself, the answer, it's not so simple. What do you think?